beginning of Matins, the priest reads 12 prayers. And one of them, the second one, the prayer, goes to, for we glorify thee, our God, who dost truly exist. Incline thine ear and hearken us, and remember by name, O Lord, all that are with us, and pray with us, and save them by thy might. Remember them by name. So our names are important. We even ask God to remember us by name. And our names are the only thing that belongs to us. Good deeds, what have you, but our names is the only thing that we will take with us into the other world. And we ask God to remember us by name. So names are important, and that is first names. Names that we in the Russian church, the practice is to give names after whom?
Saints.
After saints. For what reason? First of all, in other words, we're given the name of a saint for what reason?
So like we can emulate it?
Exactly. To follow their example, number one. Number two, if we have a saint, we're instructed to pray to him or to her and to that saint with what? Hoping that that saint will what?
Protect us. Pray for us.
Pray for us and guide us. So there's an interaction. So our names are very important. So the most important name I have is my first name, Peter. In church I have a title, so I use my title, Bishop Peter. So my full name is Bishop Peter, and that is what I sign. But for document purposes, for identification purposes, I have a last name that I have to use when I travel, when I fly. I have a license that I use as an ID. So to answer whoever wrote this, my full name is Bishop Peter, my last name is Luciano. But in church we don't use that. We use our last names for identification purposes. So did I answer the question? Whoever was interested what my full name is, yes. So I'm Bishop Peter. But if you address a bishop, the Catholic Church uses last names. The Orthodox Church does not. So in addressing a bishop, you would address, if you're writing a friendly letter, Dear Bishop Peter, or Your Grace, what have you. But you would write, Dear Bishop Lucianos. That's not practiced in the Orthodox Church.
Masha, did you have a follow-up to that?
Yes, okay.
What if you don't know what saint your name was?
Well, then you should approach your priest. Usually, when parents choose a name of a saint is immediately also chosen. The saint after whom the person is named is also chosen, but if for some reason, especially those that came from the former Soviet Union, oftentimes people are given a name or were not designated a saint. So you should approach your priest, and the priest can help you choose a saint that will be your patron saint. Oftentimes it's the closest one to your birthday, or it depends. There could be different. This is why there's not one answer that I can give you. What Hudson?
Maria.
Maria. Oh, there's so many Marias that you can choose from. Any other follow-up questions? Okay. Fathers, you want to take one of the shorter questions that were?
Actually, I take this one first. It says, how do priests, bishops, deacons, and so forth take confession? I think that first the obvious thing is, it is actually to establish, yes, we go to confession too. And I think that is quite important that you know that. The way, let's say in a normal way, a priest, a deacon priest or a bishop will go to confession is that he actually will give his confession directly at the holy table, so in the altar at the holy table. One thing is also to mention, he cannot be vested, so he will not wear any vestment. A priest will actually take his cross off. A bishop takes his panagir off. So he will not have any insignias at this time. What's I saying? A sign of that to humble himself. He's a simple sinner, and yes, he should go to confession on a regular basis, and he will do this with another priest or bishop.
I just want to follow up on that. I suspect what's behind the question is you see that your priests serve liturgy without confession. I'm sure any priest, if he could have confession every time he served liturgy, he probably would, because it's such an awesome responsibility to serve liturgy. But the fact that the priests and we bishops don't go to confession every time is, I think, is dictated just by practical reasons. You know, a priest who is by himself and the closest neighbor is 50 miles away is just not always.
Just on a practical level also, so that the young people understand, twice a year the priests get together in the diocese. We meet in Chicago, and that gives us an opportunity also to have confession, especially those who are far away from others. So we try to give the priests an opportunity also, if there's not a close priest to them, to be able to go to confession.
Also, sometimes something might happen, a priest might feel guilty about something, oh, someone died and it was my fault that I didn't, instruct this person properly or fully before the person. The priest might feel, a priest will actually make an effort to travel, for confession, because he's got this, this burden on his soul that, I really should have done more or something. Not that he's at fault, but as I said today in the sermon, that, people sometimes, not sometimes, but people with, sensitive spiritual, feelings, not that they feel that God hasn't forgiven them, but it's just that, they want to, get this off their, yes, I was thinking that, I was just saying,
Off their soul.
yeah, but it's
Off
not,
their back.
it's not getting off your chest, because, it's something spiritual, but, and oftentimes people, it's not that they say they feel that they're not forgiven, but it's just something they themselves want to remind them of, that, I am human and I did make this mistake, and they remind themselves of this, not because God hasn't forgiven them, but just so to be vigilant.
Lydia, it's a follow-up question?
Yes.
Anastasia, go ahead.
Do priests communion?
The priest what?
Communion?
Take communion?
Yeah.
Every time we say liturgy.
Actually, only under some extreme circumstance could the priest not have communion when he serves.
So even if they don't take confession?
So every
I just
liturgy.
said that.
Yeah.
It's sometimes just impossible. If a priest could confess every time, he probably would, because who feels worthy to serve the liturgy? None of us do, but we're called to serve.
Assuming it's like follow-up. Oh, I'm sorry, Lydia.
What are the extreme circumstances for a priest not to take communion? It's just out of curiosity.
If he could, feels that he's, he has an argument with someone, and they really, they leave in such a, the two people that had an argument, one of them's a priest, they leave with this feeling that, he should not only not take communion, he should not serve with such a disposition.
Just to kind of fill in on this, you may not realize, you may have seen it a little bit today when Wildika came into church. He came and he came up to the iconostants and venerated the icons, and then there were several prayers that were said. And the priests always do read those similar prayers, but usually long before anybody else is in church, so you would very rarely see it. But one of the prayers that's said is this. It says, O Lord, stretch forth thy hand from thy holy place on high, and strengthen me for this thine appointed service, that standing uncondemned before thy dread altar, I may celebrate the bloodless mystery. For thine is the power and the glory to the ages of ages. Amen. That is, the priests, in this word, by saying uncondemned, we understand that we're sinners. And there's another prayer that's read after that kind of repeats this. That is, none of us are really worthy to stand before the altar uncondemned, but we still, because of the grace bestowed to the priesthood or the bishophood, do this out of service to the people.
To answer also Maxim's question, there are sometimes, moments when a priest, feels that but that's, he can call his bishop and, the bishop can listen to what he has to say and say, no, sir. And sometimes even if we were strict with lay people, sometimes a bishop would tell the priest, no, go ahead and serve. Not because he's better, but why? Why do you think a bishop would say, no, serve? Why?
Because he has back problems.
What?
Because he has back problems.
No. No, but why would say for instance, Maxim's question, when are there cases where a priest should not serve? And a priest maybe feels guilty about something, and he calls his bishop and says, I just can't serve today. What do I do? The bishop would say, yes, no, do serve. Why would the bishop say
Anastasia?
Wait.
Is that about, are you answering the question?
Yeah, but what was the question again? Is it that?
Why would a bishop tell his priest to go ahead
What,
and serve?
a
okay.
priest
I
feels
thought-
that
okay.
he
Alright,
should not serve, but the bishop will tell him,
Yeah.
no, serve. Why would a bishop?
Because if he doesn't go to church and he doesn't serve, he might feel more angry. And if he's at church, maybe since God is there, the prayers could calm him down.
Okay, but that's on a personal level. But think this, by not serving, a priest would deny 100 people that there's no liturgy.
Oh.
So a
lead to
priest
other
would
people.
serve feeling his unworthiness, but he serves because there are 100 people in church.
Okay.
And why do they have to be punished?
Because they don't.
No.
They don't have to.
And
Yeah.
That's why the bishop would tell
It's a
the
rhetorical
priest to go ahead and serve.
Yeah. And it is
You know,
because-
I've had
Yeah.
a priest would say, well, I didn't have time to prepare, I didn't serve vigil, I didn't have time to read, and I would take it on, no, sir, because there are people coming to church, they're expecting a liturgy, and if there's no liturgy, who is being punished?
Everyone that's in
Everyone
church.
is.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
You have short questions? Go ahead. Some of the shorter ones.
Okay, so here's a question which is, how did you find your career?
That's not a short
You
one.
don't think that's a short one?
Go ahead, go ahead.
But I'll try and be quick in the sense that the answer is, I didn't really find this. If you had asked me when I was your age, will you end up being a priest in the Russian Orthodox Church? When I was your age, I went to the Methodist Church. My family all did this. I lived in St. Louis. I had been studying Russian, let's say when I was 15 for 3 years at that point. I liked Russian, but I didn't really know that it would ultimately lead me to where I am today. And even when I finished college, I worked as an English teacher, and then I worked as, I did some Russian teaching as well. I worked as a freelance journalist. I was back in teaching again, and it was only 10 years later, after finishing college, that I went back to seminary, and then 4 years after that, that I got ordained. And so, and along the way, what I would say is, I really felt God guided me along this path. Not so much, of course, I agreed with what I saw as God's will, but it wasn't a career that I chose for myself. That's why I thought it was kind of short, because I didn't really choose it.
Father, could you elaborate a little bit more, or anyone, the difference between someone saying, "Oh, I want to be a priest someday," like as in choosing their career, and it really how we view it more as it being a calling.
Well, I can tell you very, very clearly. I became Orthodox in the Serbian church, and my priest is Father Radomir, a wonderful priest. And about a year after I joined the church, he said to me, "Danilo," this is how he always called me. It's the Serbian version of Daniel is Danilo. He said, "Danilo, you need to be a priest." And I was shocked. I mean, I had been Orthodox for a year. I felt like I knew zero, and I just didn't even know what to say. I just thought he was joking, or I mean, he wasn't really joking, but I just didn't take him seriously. So I ignored him, and then 2 years later, he tells me again and again and again, and ultimately, I guess he just wore me down. And I kind of finally said, okay, I guess, I mean, I respected him enormously, and I felt that he was a very wise man, and if he thought there was a reason why that was a good thing for me to do, then I should, in a sense, submit to that. And I do have to say that part of me was interested in being a priest. I mean, the reason that I, in a sense, accepted his invitation, this is the way it works with God offers things, and accept and deny them. Why I accepted it was because as someone who grew up without confession, without Holy Communion, without the grace of the church, and then suddenly became a member of the church, I saw all of these things and how it helped my life. And out of simple compassion for my friends, who I looked at, family and people that I grew up with, who I looked at them and saw so-and-so would live such a better life if they could confess and know that they had been forgiven. Or so-and-so could really use the grace of Holy Communion. And if that were available to them, then it would be of benefit. And so, in a sense, I thought, well, perhaps God arranged it for me to start studying Russian as a young man from the 8th grade, and then go to Russia and find out about Orthodoxy. All of this happened because God wanted to help these people, and maybe I could participate in that.
May I? The words that we use have real meaning, and there's even a word which has a very negative negative connotation in Russian, karierist, someone who's a careerist in the church, right? We hear this sometimes. So being a priest or being a monk, a nun, serving the church is not really a career. It's really a vocation, or we could call it a calling. And I know whoever wrote that wasn't trying to imply that, but I think it's important to understand we don't usually call it a career, just because it should be something that's more than just a way to kind of make some money so you can retire and live in Florida for a few years before you die. It should be more than that, ideally.
I think there's a little bit of both. There's if a person wants to be a priest, I think that is very good. And even the Apostle Paul writes that who wants to be a bishop desires good. It's not that authority, it's the desire to help people. What can be more loftier, what can be more than to help people find salvation? And that is the calling of a priest. So if a person who wants to be a priest, there's some, part of it is his desire, and then there's also the calling. What I think we have to make clear here is people who think they are worthy. I remember reading, this was the same time I was telling you about the trip to Mount Athos. This was 30 years ago exactly, and that it happened. There was an article in the paper, and I read it, and then a few months later, the two young men who were traveling with Vladika Laura and myself to Mount Athos, as we were sitting in the car, the bus, I remember one of them posed this question, and I remember reading that this happened in England. Some person committed a murder, and I think even murdered his own mother. Anyway, he ended up being convicted, sentenced to life imprisonment, but in prison the person, found God, repented and all. Well, that's good. But then this person even was, I think, released from prison because of his exemplary behavior in prison, and the person completely changed his life. and the person wanted to be ordained, not in the Orthodox Church, in the Anglican Church, because he felt that he, and I was asked that question by these two young men who were traveling with Vladika and myself to Mount Athos, and I said that there's no sin God will not forgive, but what is wrong in this picture when a person says, I want to be ordained? He himself passes judgment on himself. If his Anglican bishop calls him and says, John Smith, I want you to be a priest. I think you would be a good example to those people who, what true repentance is. And the person would say, oh, your grace, I can't, I'm a convicted felon, that's my decision. I find that you would be a good priest and worthy now. That is one thing. Another thing, if a person himself says, I feel, that God has forgiven me and I want to be a priest, that is the wrong approach. That is wrong. So if a person feels he wants to serve the church, he wants to be a priest, that's good. First of all, it reminds him, and I think it could help him as a young adult, to lead a life accordingly, so he doesn't do anything to jeopardize his future in the church. So I think it's very good. Also, there's the second part of it, which is a calling, like with Father Daniel, where his priest told him, you should be a priest, and he obeyed and took the advice. And so I think the most important thing is that anyone who wants to serve the church should always remember his недостоинство, his unworthiness. And that, if a person has that approach, that feeling, he will be a good pastor. I don't know, did we answer your question? Okay, you have, да, Вова, что ты хочешь? Why do I have a beard? I know you already asked me that.
No, I wasn't going to say that.
What were you going to say?
Why do we have crosses that we when we take a shower, sometimes we take it off?
Well, a cross is a symbol of
what happens if we burn our cross?
Yeah,
and we can't have any money, or we're poor, we don't have any money.
Well, I think someone will give you a cross if you don't have money. Okay.
Don't get in the video.
No, that's all right. I would rather be in disembodied voice. I think it adds more to the.
I understand that.
So here are two interesting questions which were given to me as short answers. I'm not sure why. What is the Antichrist? Which could be a really excellent doctoral dissertation. And then what is the rapture? And then what is the difference? So, in 2 quick minutes, the Antichrist will appear close to the end of the world and will seem like Christ and will have a lot of things in his life that seem kind of like what Christ's life was like, but will not be Christ and will in fact be a servant of the devil. And we read about this in the New Testament. St. John the Divine speaks about this. We read about it in the also in the Apocalypse. So that's what the Antichrist is.
He will seemingly be like Christ. In actuality, he will be the opposite. Christ was meek, this person will be proud. Christ was loving, this person will have hatred. He will cover it, but he will hate everyone and everything. And he will be envious, he will be a liar, a cheat, but he will cover it up.
Right. Anastasia?
How would he cover it up? How
Well,
would you know?
he will have excellent staff of marketing people and sort of be able. I mean, it won't just be like that, but there will be a lot of resources that will be used to help this person to cover his tracks, so to speak, and also he will be working with the darker powers to do this.
But even in our life, people say, "Oh, you're such a good," people are complimenting you when down deep they really don't. They might despise you. So we see it around us, but this will be on a much more higher level.
And then the next question is, what is the rapture? So the rapture is a concept which is perhaps at most 200 years old in the Western Church, mostly in the Protestant Church, that at some point before Christ comes again, all of the righteous people will float away to heaven, and only will be left here are unrighteous people. So this is something relatively new. Not even all Protestant churches accept it. It's completely unknown in the Orthodox Church. But you hear a lot about it now because there are popular or somewhat popular book series about this, movies about this. Your Protestant friends might talk about this. So that's what the rapture is. Okay, and then what's the difference? Well, the two actually really aren't connected except maybe on a very high level. There's no real comparison between the two. So the Antichrist and the rapture, we could find a connection, but the differences I think we
Some
talked
of the
about.
people who talk about the rapture, isn't it said usually that the rapture will happen once the Antichrist is here, right? Isn't that
part of
that's
the?
concept? That's
Isn't that part of the? Какъв е самая
Chileism, the 1,000 year, yeah, it is. Yes, it's a concept which a greater sort of concept is considered this 1,000 year reign of Christ when he returns. And anyway, there's a lot of really interestingly weird theological ideas outside the church, and this one happens to be one of those, which, as I said, is not even accepted in what we would call traditional Protestant churches.
What happens also, you have to understand, for instance, when Moses wrote down the book of Genesis, the Hebrew language was very primitive. The vocabulary of the Hebrew language at the time of Moses was maybe 500 words. And can you imagine writing down what God, what God inspired him for his people using a vocabulary of such a limited vocabulary? Of course, they used terminology that was familiar to the people, and it's very, very simple terminology. And so this is where people sometimes would misinterpret it. Same thing with the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was exalted, lifted up into the third heavens, and he said he saw things that cannot be explained in words, yet he had to somehow pass it on. And he writes about, he uses contemporary contemporary expressions to explain something much more wider. And he compares the kingdom of heaven with 1,000-year reign, which means, who has ever reigned for 1,000 years? No one. So the 1,000-year reign actually means something, what?
Everlasting.
Everlasting. And so, say for instance, the sectarians took this expression, 1,000-year reign, and gave it an actual meaning, that it will be literal meaning, that it will be 1,000-year reign. The Apostle Paul doesn't write. So often, this is why we have to be very careful. And so, if we have a question, something from the Holy Scriptures, to ask our priest or someone knowledgeable, because oftentimes it is an expression that was used, or even the gospel. Pontius Pilate asks Christ a question, and Christ said, "You said so." That is an expression used in those days which meant what?
Exactly.
Yes. The answer was yes. It was a positive answer. But that was the expression that was used. So, and so someone, just wanted to add to that, this is where the church answered all these questions, but some of these people, 18 centuries later, were reading the the scriptures, and they, all of a sudden they understood. The fathers for 1800 centuries could, and they read it. But this is what it means. All of a sudden, they have, how's that light that appears?
Yes, the light bulb goes off. Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. The next question: who came up with church services? How did they? When did they? What brought them to come up with the things they did? Why did they? Very good question, though. There's nothing to laugh about. I'm just reading it so you understand. The first services were instructed by whom? And to whom?
Jesus to the apostles.
Well, even before that.
Oh, the high
The
priest.
Jews, God instructed Moses, gave him specific instructions. But even before that,
God to Abraham.
even before that,
God to Adam.
yes. When we read it, when we read in the Bible that God, came to the Garden of Eden and spoke with Adam and Eve, excuse me for putting it so bluntly, but God would not speak about the weather, If God came to speak with his creation, God came to speak to do what?
Teach.
Teach, instruct. And the Holy tradition tells us that God was teaching Adam and Eve how to worship him, how to serve him. So sacrifices wasn't something Adam and Eve taught up. The instruction came exactly in what form or what we don't know, but the instruction to worship came from God. And we know that God instructed Abraham, God instructed Moses, but most importantly, Jesus Christ, the God-man, instructed his disciples. And he gave them just one instruction to do what? What instruction?
Pray.
Okay, Balitis, yes, he did say that. But in sense of service, to worship.
To pass on his teachings?
Okay, but that's teaching. We're talking about services here.
To love God? To love God.
No, et zapovedi, those are commandments. We're talking about service.
To pass on the history of what happened.
But then,
Service.
at the Last Supper, at the Last
Communion.
Supper, didn't Christ tell his what?
Communion.
Communion, yes. I'm sorry. I have an infected ear and my hard of hearing, so today when the priests were trying to tell me from the altar what the word was, I couldn't even hear them. I heard something, but I couldn't distinguish the word. Anyway, Christ instructed his disciples to perform the Eucharist in his memory. So to perform the Eucharist, the Divine Liturgy, that is an immediate and direct instruction of Christ himself, the founder of the church. And it's the most important liturgy, most important service. And for 300 years, while the Christians were persecuted, all attention, all energy was given to serve that service, to perform the Eucharist, to have communion. The Christians of the first 3 centuries lived under persecution. And so anyone who became a Christian also potentially had to be willing to do what?
Die for the faith.
Die. To witness his faith unto death. So that, the caliber of the Christians of the first 3 centuries were really, high, because it was people who were willing to die. Beginning in the 4th century, Christianity was given freedom, and as oftentimes happens, and we see this now in the former Soviet Union, there's no longer that sort of prerequisite that, you might die. And so people who maybe weren't as strong in their faith, it's not that they're not good, but maybe not as strong, or were willing to die for it, or to, lose their job or what have you for it, started, what I'm trying to say is that the caliber of the Christian life, slightly, the level of it was lowered. And those people that sort of, I'm generalizing, so please, those people that sort of, how should I say, ну, жалели, or, you know, people that, how should I say it, that тот уровень христианской жизни, how should I say it in English? People who, that miss that
high level.
the high level, they wanted to, you know, retain that sort of that level of Christian life. What did they start to do?
Become monks.
Yes, they started going to isolate places, to deserts, to mountains, or where no one would nothing or no one would distract them. And in order to devote themselves fully to Christian life. Living in asceticism, living in isolated places, these people strove to, there weren't persecutions any longer, but they strove to be constantly in the presence of God, you know, to constantly try to please God. And what is one of our ways of communicating with God is what?
Prayer.
Prayer. And one of the books of prayers that we were handed down from the Old Testament were the book of Psalms. And the book of Psalms is the basis of all our services. So the monks living in the deserts would sing the Psalms, you know, they would choose the Psalms appropriate for this. So the Psalms are the basis of our services. So to answer the question, the services were developed by monks who constantly wanted to be in the presence of God, who constantly wanted to communicate with God. And one of the books of prayers that they use are the Psalms. Actually, mostly the Psalms. So in the monasteries we have, you know, this whole cycle of services that were developed. Now, the people who remain in the world, they had their liturgies, that is the essential service. But you know, they saw all these beautiful, this whole, you know, how should I say, this whole cycle of services that were developed in the monasteries that are beautiful. So the services that was developed in the monasteries were sort of brought back into the world. And that's where we have vespers, matins, hours, and the purpose of them is to prepare us for what? The most important service, which is divine liturgy. So I hope that it wasn't too short, but I hope you understood that the services wasn't something that someone sat down and invented. It was something that grew organically. And the basis for the services are the Psalms, which themselves are what? Praises to God. And this is why a lot of the refrains in the church, so by the prayers of the Holy Fathers, well, that was in the monasteries. You know, the brethren, the only time that's not used is if the bishop is present. Okay, you might have a follow-up, or the fathers might want to add something, I don't know. So, why I started, you know, from way back is, we are accused of organized religion, you know, something that we invented. No, it is something that grew, you know, естественно, something that grew naturally.
Well, but I think the important kernel of that is it grew around these divine commands. God telling Moses, God telling Abraham, Christ telling his disciples, this is the core of all that's done. It's not some man or woman off somewhere creating a whole new set of service, which is the case today with a lot of the sects you run into America. These are individuals who had some sort of a vision or some sort of a plan to make money. L. Ron Hubbard and company, I think these are people that
How about Sun Myung Moon?
Sun Myung Moon. I mean, there's a lot of people who look on the church and say, this is a great way to make money, a great business to be in. And unfortunately, all of us as faith people who have faith suffer because there are examples of this. And when you look at them with any sort of rational approach, you see that it's fake, that there's something unnatural, something that's motivated not by love, but by greed. The words might say love, but it's really something else that's motivated. And so we have to understand that in our church, we have a different source for all that we do. In those early 3 centuries that Vladika mentioned, before the church could become free, when it was persecuted, we understand that fully the Holy Spirit guided everyone in what they did, and it still guides us today, but that was what supported them at that point.
On that, just to follow up on what I said myself, sometimes people say, oh, I love vigil, it's quiet in church, it's dark, votive lamps flickering, the singing, oh, I just love Vespers, or I love vigil. Fine, the most important service is the liturgy. And if you love Vespers, that much more better. But liturgy is most important.
That is a hopefully short answer. When you go to confession, are you allowed to write down the bad things you did? I think the short answer is yes. You certainly are allowed to write this down and bring it to confession.
Just don't lose that piece of paper.
Yes, you don't want to lose that. But as a matter of fact, what I wanted to tack onto that answer is because it points to something that you should keep in mind when you go into confession, that you actually have to prepare for confession. It's not that you just well, sometimes something pops into your mind and you go spontaneously, but the normal order should be that you actually prepare for confession and really examine your conscience, and because then confession is especially fruitful, because then you will start working on getting rid of all of that and starting working to become a better Christian. And even if you're falling down into the same thing, coming back and start again working on this. So that this examination is really important. So if it helps you to write this down, to not forget things, then certainly do that.
I think that's probably what was meant, that a person thought of something and not to forget.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with writing it down.
There's even, we have to realize that if we as lay people are able to confess probably at most once a week and maybe once every couple of weeks, in a monastery it's not uncommon to have people confess on a daily basis. And so we take examples from the monks, and one of the advice that some monks give is for people to keep a diary, so that at the end of each day you might contemplate some of what happened, thank God for this, but also record some of your own sins, have a period of self-reflection. And for all of you who are young and trying to establish yourself, kind of making a conscious effort to reflect upon your day. What did I do today? What are my impressions? What was it that was beneficial for my soul? Or what is it that I need to make sure I remember to tell at confession this coming weekend? This is a good spiritual practice for us to try to adopt. It can be very, very beneficial. Anna?
If I just interrupt, sorry. I just wanted also to remind you that confession is a sacrament. It is a time when the priest is only a witness. You're confessing to whom?
God.
To God. Does God know your sins already?
Yes.
Of course. So what God wants from us? To admit them. To admit them and to take responsibility. And a confession is precisely that. When we, before a priest, we're actually confessing to God that we acknowledge that I did that, and you confess it. A confession is not a time of what?
Making up stuff.
Excuse me?
Making up stuff and
No,
just
well, yes, but
retelling
it's
it
not
over
a time
and over again.
for to have a chit chat with a priest, even if it's something important. It's a sacrament. No?
A question like about confession. Like if you killed somebody, is the priest allowed to go tell the police or anything?
Strictly no. Strictly no. Why did you?
No, I mean like
Are you trying to get around confession now?
No. But what a priest should do, he shouldn't try to instruct you to go and confess to the police.
I'm not like
So don't get yourself in that situation. That's the message.
Solid answer.
If you come and but is it true confession if you don't want to take responsibility for what you did?
no.
It's beginning, but it's not a full confession yet. So.
Anastasia?
Okay, so my question was about the diary thing.
That what?
The diary when when you said that keep a diary. Well, if you try to keep a diary, everyone is too nosy and gets in it and starts reading it, and like your sister can find it anywhere because she goes in your room, but like and your mom finds it and then she reads it and she goes, oh no, why'd you do this or something, because that happened to me a couple times. So how should I keep track of what I do? If people
Well,
can
what
read
I
it?
would say is if you intend to keep a diary like that, and you would like to have it be a spiritual diary, then I would first talk to your mom and say, Mom, I would like to have this diary. And I would like you to not look at it.
Well,
And I would, hold on, and I would like you to help my little sister not find it.
okay.
So Mom, where can I keep it where you will know where it is, and I will know where it is, but my little sister won't? And will you, Mom, allow me to do this, to have a diary that is my thought, and explain to her why you want to do it?
Yes.
Because the truth is, parents bear a spiritual responsibility for all their children. Until you are on your own, they have to answer to God for you. So when you do something wrong, yes, you're in trouble and you need to confess it to God, but the parent also has some degree. It's not always clear the precise connection, but there's some degree of responsibility the parent has. So why I'm saying this is, it's not out of bounds, it's not beyond what the church tells us that a parent be able to look at your computer history on what sites you've been going to look at, right? It's not unusual for a parent to look at your phone and see the texts that you've been having. These are things just like a parent would hear your conversation, would go in your room. These are normal relationships. But if you want to create a kind of exception to that, you need to talk to your mom about it and explain why you'd like to do this. Because it sounds like maybe in the past you didn't get her in the loop, and so it became a little surprise. I mean, that's what I would suggest.
So, thank you.
Sure. So here's another question, and I'll translate it. It says that Protestants and Methodists have a very active, broad range of missionary work, and how can we, as young people, help in the missionary activity? And then kind of part of this is what is the approach of the Orthodox Church to missionary activity? And I selected this question because I'm very interested in one particular saint, Saint Innocent, who was the bishop of, ended his life as a metropolitan in Moscow, who began as a missionary in Alaska. So he's often known as Saint Innocent of Alaska here in America because he's one of several saints who actually lived on this territory. He was traveled around the United States as well as Alaska. But also he's well known in Russia as a great missionary. He founded actually a whole missionary society that continued long after he had died. And so he has a very interesting set of instructions to missionaries that he composed when he first became bishop in Alaska and in Siberia. And it's very interesting. The first thing he says in this is that he addresses it to the priests. He says, the first thing you must do when you want to begin any missionary activity is pray. The first thing you must do is pray about whatever it is that's going to happen. You're going to go visit someone who's not Orthodox, who's interested in being Orthodox, say a prayer. You're going to go somewhere and do something that you understand has a missionary element, say a prayer. This is the essence. And I think when we compare the Orthodox approach with Protestant or other sectarians in their approach, you know, the Mormons come and knock on the doors and they're dressed in suits, and I'm sure every one of you at your home has had somebody knock on the door and say, you know, what do you know about God? And, you know, kind of try to engage you in a conversation. Or Seventh-day Adventists do this. And there are other sorts of Protestant groups and sectarians who go out in this active sort of missionary. Maybe for those of you in college campuses, there are people who come. I remember when I was in college, there was a man who was a kind of a wandering missionary who would come and stand right outside the square where all the student mailboxes were. So pretty much everybody came by this place every day because we all went to check our mailboxes. And he would stand out there and just try and engage people in a conversation about something having to do with Christ ultimately, but he was just a missionary. That was his activity. And we don't see a lot of those examples of Orthodox doing those kinds of things today. And so some people come to the conclusion, which is wrong, that the Orthodox Church is not missionary. We are a very missionary church, and we understand that our mission is to do precisely what Christ said, that is, preach the gospel throughout all the world and baptize everyone in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is what Christ commanded us to do, and we try to do that. But how we go about that is, it's important for us to realize that we understand that our prayer can ignite in someone God's grace, can send God's grace to them, and on their own, God will kind of pick them up and bring them to church. And as a priest, Father I'm sure is familiar with this, and Velika of course, as a priest, a lot of times I look out and I see my parish, people I know, but then I'll see somebody new. And I often think to myself, well, look who God sent to us today. I didn't go out and get that person. But as a priest, I understand that I'm a missionary right now. Someone new has walked through the door. Something has happened in this person's life that made them come to church. And so I have to respond to God's action on their heart that brought them to church. I, as a priest, am responsible for then meeting that person and trying to do God's work by helping that person. So, and the other part of it would be just simply, you might not realize this, but when you wear clothes like this and you walk around all over the place, people say to you, well...
are you a rabbi?
Well, they do say, are you a rabbi?
You look normal to me. I mean, I think that's a perfectly normal thing to wear around.
I understand. I understand really. But in any case, it becomes an opportunity for missionary activity. I remember once I was at a theater event with my wife. It was a folk dancing performance, and it was a great performance. And she was just going to use the ladies' room in the intermission. And this man came up to me, and he recognized instantly I was a priest, and he started to confess to me. He gave me pretty much his life confession, just talking to me and saying, you know, Father, I had these problems that happened to me when I was young, and I had this happen, and I had this happen, and I had this happen. And he just started, and I didn't do anything. He just walked up to me, which is not to say that Orthodox can't be active missionaries, and they often are. And one of the ways we do that is by translating things. And St. Innocent had a very intentional, conscious program for translating the services and Holy Scripture into many languages. And the Orthodox Church continues to do this. So
I just wanted to add to that, that there's also, I presume, one of the questions behind the question was, why don't we do what the Protestants do, or the Catholics, go out there? Well, when Russia, at least I can answer for Russia because I studied Russian church history, when Russia had the opportunity, it did. We now, being the Russian church abroad, we're very small, we're not that well off, we do what we can, and the best missionary activity is to lead by example. But also, I just wanted to tell you that there is a slight difference of approach to missionary work as the West sees it and as the Orthodox Church, which is primarily the East, sees it. Those of you who studied American history, for instance, when the Spanish missionaries in California preached to the Indians, what did they do?
I was just laughing.
I know that.
Especially this famous father, Juniper Serra. What did they do with the Indians?
I know that they killed an Orthodox boy,
St. Peter. No, but say for instance, the Catholic missionaries would come. They would, the Indians would come out of curiosity or because they were employed, and the Catholics would baptize them.
Oh, without asking?
Well, maybe they asked them, but the person doesn't know anything about Christianity. And the Catholic answer is, you don't appreciate it now, but you will later. The Orthodox approach is, you don't baptize someone if he doesn't know what he's accepting. You first what?
Teach him.
Teach him. So there's also a difference of approach. Saint Innocent, whom Father Daniel mentioned, Saint Nikolai of Japan, our other, missionary saints, Saint Nina in the 4th century, they would go to a place. They would do what first? Learn the language, learn the customs, translate, the scriptures. In the meantime, living a Christian life to set an example. So also the approach to missionary activity is slightly different.
But
Yes,
could I mention just one thing? Oh,
Go ahead, Bob.
about this, very interesting. There's a really good book called Father Cosmas. It's about a missionary who was in the Congo, and what he wrote, he had a very remarkable life, and he was in our times. What he used to write when people would say, "When are you coming back to Greece?" because he was a monk in Greece, he'd say, an Orthodox missionary has to be ready to leave his bones in the place where he goes to be a missionary. That is, you don't just go there to visit as a, like a vacation for a few years. You're going there, you dedicate yourself to the people who are there until you die there.
One thing that the Protestants do, they stand on street corners and they, repent. Well, it's good that they're calling people to repentance, but that's not the Orthodox approach.
Well, and the other part of the question is, what can you do? Okay, and one of the things you do whether you realize it or not. Every single one of you is a missionary. When you start to talk to people and they say, "Oh, you haven't celebrated Christmas yet. Why not?" "Well, I'm Russian Orthodox and we celebrate in January." Right? You're instantly on that person's radar as somebody a little bit different. And then when they look at you, they start saying, "Well, yes, I know someone who's Orthodox. That is you." And so then all of a sudden, all of your behavior, whatever it is you do, and I'm not trying to pressure you, but I just want you to realize that you carry with you this identity as an Orthodox Christian. And you can be a great example to all of them when they look at you and they realize and they say, "Well, yes, I met this person from the country of Georgia, and they're an Orthodox Christian. And so I understand that Orthodox Christians don't curse." Well, they'll know that if you don't curse. Right? They'll understand that, well, Orthodox Christians are some of the most kindest, understanding people I've ever met. They'll know that if that's you. So in a sense, each one of us is a missionary. This is one of the things that St. Innocent really stressed, was that every Christian has some responsibility as a missionary. Nina right here was just telling a couple of people in the van that why don't you bring a friend, one of your friends who's not Orthodox, to church, just to say, come and see where I go to church. You know, you're talking to someone and they're saying, oh, I got some problems, I don't know what to do, and you might say, well, have you considered praying? You know, these are ways in which you can actively be a missionary, and you might not even realize it that you are.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Father. Go ahead.
No, it's not about this.
I have a question. How much example could mean? You all have heard or even seen the Amish. Do you have respect for them?
Yeah.
We all
have
do.
respect for everyone.
We disagree with their beliefs, but do we have respect for them? Yes, we do, because we see what? Their example and their way of life. They are setting examples. And are there some bad Amish people? Yes, we read about them in the paper occasionally, even among the Amish you get. But overall, everyone I think you would talk to has respect for the Amish. They've earned it by being an example of what they believe. Okay, Father, go ahead. Sorry.
Why does our Christmas happen on January 7th? Actually, our Christmas happens on December 25th. It just so happens that the civil calendar, that's January 7th. So we can go into a long discussion about how the two calendars deviate, but most important is that we understand we're actually celebrating on December 25th. It happens to be January 7th on the civil calendar.
What is today's date?
January 28th.
28th.
December 28th. Yeah.
But in the Orthodox calendar is December 15th.
Really?
It's 13 days.
There's a 13-day difference.
Oh.
So
So Christmas, our nativity, will be December 25th.
This is why
On our
there's,
calendar.
Because
This is why
everyone
there's a-
asks me. Sorry.
this is why there's a church New Year as opposed to the civil New Year. Right?
So all of us, because of the way the calendar works, at least most of us, will always celebrate Nativity on January 7th on the civil calendar. Perhaps if Vova lives to be a very old man, that he will live long enough to see it be January 8th. Because it deviates on centuries, on a year that's divisible by 100, as long as that year is not divisible by 1,000. So I realize that you thought there would be no math here, and that will be the end of it. But if you want to know more, talk to one of us privately, so we don't go into like the calculus of the calendar.
It's
So
just
just like
that
keep
the-
going.
Now your question might be, why does the church keep this calendar? Well, first of all, why change? Everything we have is so fixed, so connected with the calendar. Why throw it into turmoil just so we can have Christmas together with your Western friends?
And Christmas is a family holiday.
And besides, they oftentimes are envious of us because our Christmas is more spiritual. Unfortunately, the Western world has commercialized Christmas, so.
Yeah. They think that Christmas is all about giving and
Getting.
getting and stuff like that. It's really not. It's just because. Well, never mind. It'll take a long time for me to
It's
explain.
religious, so it's bad in today's world.
Shall I keep answering?
Please, Father Gregory.
So why don't priests shave? And the answer is that actually most priests do shave on some level, but we agree when we are ordained that we will grow a beard. There are sometimes exceptions to that. You can get a blessing from the bishop if for some reason, like we have a priest who is a surgeon and he has to keep his beard very short because he has to wear a surgical
In the
mask.
military, they won't allow beards.
Right, but
Mustaches, yes, but not beards.
And the reason is because in the ancient times, the only people who shaved were pagans. Only the Romans shaved. Religious people did not shave. And Christ, of course, did not also. And so it's a sign of faith, and it's also an emulation of Christ. And maybe Lydia could answer even more details.
Also, why did the Romans shave? Why?
Because, well, I guess they're military power, and if you have a beard, someone can easily grab your beard and chop off your head.
Exactly. It was
basically.
for practical reasons. You know, if someone can grab you and pull you by your beard.
And didn't they in the early church, when they had an icon of Christ, wasn't he clean shaven like a Roman, so they couldn't
No, there's
detect?
an icon of Christ called the Big Sinuous.
A youth.
A youth, yes, and so he, of course, is a beard.
Thomas had a question.
Why do you guys keep your hair long?
The same reason. The Romans used to cut their hair, and the believing Jews didn't cut their hair, and the same thing Christ did not. Now you see more priests who cut their hair, but again, if you get a blessing from the bishop, if you have to do that
But
for some reason.
in the middle ages, there was, what does the word tonsure mean?
Oh, like when your hair's, you mean when the bald spot in the middle and then...
Slaves in the Roman world were had, they were either shaven or what have you. If they escaped, everyone could see, oh, that's a slave. So monastics received tonsure. Every Orthodox Christian receives tonsure when?
Baptism.
Baptism. It's a expression of submission. But the priests do not shave their beards or cut their hair, just as Father said, because that was something that we inherited from the Old Testament, and it's something that grows. If you live in the desert, it was such a hassle to shave every morning, for me especially. I always had a thick beard. So this is actually a relief.
Why do Muslims think that pigs are unclean or bad? So we mentioned in the conversation we had about Islam that there was some Jewish and also Christian influence on Muhammad, and one of the things that he apparently found interesting was that the Jews had kosher laws, and Islam has a very similar, not exact, but very similar law about how animals can be killed, which animals are clean, which are unclean. Halal, it's called. And well, I know who answers the question, and we live in a place where there's halal markets everywhere. You see them all over the place, in Ann Arbor, Detroit, whatever. And it's a certain law, just like the kosher law that the Jews have.
I suspect there are also some practical reasons, because ham is one of the first meats that goes bad.
Absolutely. How dangerous is it to have electronic devices in the divine services? I'm translating here on the fly. For instance, to have electronic books used in the services. So actually, we had a quick conversation about this. Did you see this one, Vladika?
Yes.
Okay, we had a quick conversation about that. Would you prefer to answer it?
No, go ahead.
So Vladika make a good point that I didn't think about. From a practical point of view, there's no real danger, but what's important is to know how to actually put the services together, how to do the services. If everything is all prepared and all ready for you, well, what happens when the iPad is taken away, or you lose it, or whatever? If you don't know how to take the books and combine the service appropriately, then you've let this crutch take away an opportunity for you to know how things are supposed to work. So it's not bad in and of itself, but what's better is to actually know how the services work and how you can take the various books and combine them to perform the services appropriately.
Well, and I think I would add too that some people have this idea that to be a monk, for example, is someone who leaves the world and therefore must have no technology. Like we have this idea of like Roman Catholic cloistered monks who live and never say a word, and they live in a place where they only have heat by wood, and they use water that they bring from the creek, and everything's natural and organic and da 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 da. But I was always surprised, and not really surprised, but I noticed, for example, when I went to Manathos on one occasion and been to a number of other different monasteries in different countries, oftentimes the monks are some of the most technologically attuned people I've met. This is not all of them, but many of them will have, for Manathos, they have ways to generate electricity with solar panels, and they might have a computer with a satellite dish. And this was back 20 years ago when those things existed, but it wasn't nearly as common as it was today. And we do have, for example, some of bishops in our church who like to have their service books on an iPad. So it's not everyone, and I don't think Vladika is a fan of that in particular, but in and of itself, the technology is not a problem.
Monks were, in the Middle Ages, monks were some of the most advanced people. what we see today, you know, but you know, writing of books or rewriting of books, and that was very advanced.
Right, it would be saying that the electronic device is abjectly bad is like saying, well, we used to use these service books that were copied by hand by monks. Now we have these newfangled things that are printed on a printing press, and those are no good because they're not hand copied. You know, technology will always march forward. It's not in and of itself bad. It's how you apply the technology that's available to use it for good or for bad. But I thought Vladika's point was really good about how you may have this, but you need to understand how these things are put together, so that if somebody turns off the lights, you can light a candle and continue to use to continue to have the service.
And I think all of you understand that our dependency on electricity, okay, it makes life much more interesting, but it also puts us in a very, very big disadvantage should what?
Blackout.
Excuse me?
Blackout.
If there's a blackout, everything stops.
That's why you shouldn't trust electronic.
That's why you should always have a backup.
Candle and a printed
Yeah.
Bible.
Continue with the service here.
Just wondering, like talking about the tonsure, why did the Western, like, church take the tonsure and we didn't?
You mean the have the
Yeah.
hair cut like
Yeah.
that?
We did, if you look at the icons of saints from the 12th, 13th century, Saint Sava of Serbia, he's got that.
Gregory
Yeah.
Palamas, his always had
St.
those.
Lawrence too, right? The deacon?
There are others. Well, it depends on who paints the icon also, but that was just for a time in the church.
Well, the Western church I think had a lot longer. probably.
This is an interesting question, and the two are related. One's written in English, one's in Russian, so I'll have to I'll read it in Russian, then I'll translate it. Этот вопрос насчет реформ Никона, патриарха Никона и старообрядцев. Зачем были сделаны реформы и сохранили ли мы истинную веру? This question concerns reforms of Patriarch Nikon and the Old Rite, and then why were the reforms made, and have we kept the true faith? Второй about vestments, but okay, yes, but you're right. Were there any difference in bishops' vestments before the reforms? There were, but it has nothing to do with reforms. But I will answer that. Again, you know, sometimes why I said there are short questions and long questions. To answer this, I could answer it directly, but I could also try to explain to you the situation, which I will try to do because I find that much more important. Paganism has 3 stages in its development. The most elementary, crude stage of paganism is what? Deification of what?
Nature.
Nature. Sun, moon, the earth, water, what have you. The second stage is what? Deification of
Concepts.
that would be the third.
Heroes.
People.
Gods?
Space.
Deification of
Forces.
forces. That would be, well, in Russian folklore, лешие, русалки, водяные, you know, mermaids, the spirits in the forest, what have you. And the third most developed level of paganism is concepts, love, poetry, valor, truth, what have you. And if you examine any pagan religion, they don't go beyond that. So, our forefathers, the Slavs, the northern Slavs, they were very brave people, very honorable, very, how should I say, truthful and all. But paganism of our forefathers was very, very primitive. We were in a stage from the we were in a transitional stage from the first to the second. When Christianity came to Russia, Christianity had a 1,000-year history. It was a developed, we believe it's the truth, but in the worldly sense, you know, it was a very developed religion with, how should I say, developed outward expression of prayer, music, art. Our dogmas were, recorded and, written, explained. Whereas the faith of our forefathers was very primitive, in a transitional stage from the first to the second. And so when Christianity came to Russia, there was no conflict. There were very few martyrs in the Russian church before the 20th century, because paganism could not offer any resistance. When Christianity came, it just overwhelmed, what existed. We didn't even have pagan temples. We had эти самые, как они были, кудесники, these wizards. There was no priesthood, there was no temples. So when Christianity came to our forefathers, they were overwhelmed with the beauty, with the services, everything. Where did paganism remain? I said in the social life, Christianity just took over. Where did paganism remain?
Like folk songs and stuff.
Some of the traditions.
You're on the right
Legends.
track, but where did it remain?
Culture? Legends. Legends.
In the home.
Oh.
There was, and I decided to go into such detail. I think there is comparison with what's going on in Russia today. After 90 years of communism, the church is free now and people are overwhelmed. But down deep in the families, this how should I say, atheistic ideas are still there. So the church sort of overwhelmed everything, but down in the families, pagan traditions, what have you, still existed. Oh, our words even reflect that. What was chur? The word chur. That was an invincible boundary around the home. And the spirits that protected the home, they worked only to this invisible boundary that was called chur. And what word do we get from this?
Чур меня.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of a different word. Через чур.
No.
Someone who goes beyond. Он через чур далеко зашел. I mean, he went past that border. The home spirit's no longer protected. The Russian word через чур comes from that. Someone who went beyond. So, in the home, and as I say, I don't want to draw comparisons, but I think there are a lot of comparisons. The church was there. The people were taught to worship on Sunday, to do this and that. But back home, they still, all of this, Leshe, Damavы. Leshe was the spirit in the where? Forest, les. Damavы was the spirits at home. Rusalki were the spirits in the water, what have you. So there's all this superstition, which is very much alive today again, unfortunately, among the Russian people. The church very calmly, very systematically very patiently fought all this. The only two levels of society accepted Christianity fully, did not retain any pagan, sort of, that was the monastics, of course, and they came from but they would leave the world to join the monasteries where everything, and,
Royalty?
yes, княжеские роды. That's why in the Kievan period we have so many saintly princes. The princely families, they were either much more educated or what, but they accepted fully. But anyway, the church very patiently, fought this, and it took the church 200 years to sort of get this pagan spirit out of the house. And what happens at that time? Okay, so the people gradually, the society, the people let go of the pagan traditions, pagan superstition, pagan, ideas of things. Oh, I had a lady just recently tell me, well, not yesterday, but I took something and I went, I threw it over. She says, "Что вы, что вы?" What did I do, She says, "You should never throw a bag over your right shoulder." Why not? Oh, that's where your guardian angel is. I mean, you have to go over your left and knock him on the head. I'm serious. I'm serious.
You mean like, say you have two little people on your shoulders?
Okay, in a way it's funny. In a way, like, the fathers of, in ancient Rus. But what is the good thing about what she told me is that she is aware of what? Guardian angels, and then there's a devil, besi, который, So I tried not to laugh, and I told, I tried to compliment her, and I said, well, but then, guardian angel, okay, yes, we should, but if I throw it back over, I didn't bonk him on the head. But anyway, so I'm not trying to be funny, but you understand, if a person, the person is superstitious, but there's something you can catch on and sort of use to explain to the person. So same thing here, the church gradually ousted all that out. What came in to take the place of that, the vacuum sort of that was?
Ritualism?
Well, you're on the right track. The people finally accepted Christianity fully into their lives. But what happens in this stage is they lower their understanding to their level. But that's a good sign in what respect?
They're trying to understand.
And that is the beginning of...
Like improving your understanding.
That is the beginning. You're on the right track. I'm not saying no. It's the beginning when a local church starts to develop. This is why those who are trying to create American Orthodoxy, you can't do that. The American people have to sort of accept Orthodoxy fully, and then start giving of themselves. And so when the Russian people sort of the church got rid of all this pagan baggage, and the Russian people accepted Christianity fully into their life. Yes, sometimes it also borders with, superstition or ritualism, what have you. But that is when the people started already giving something back. And what did we give back? Our music. Our church music reflects what? Our наш русский дух. The music that we got first was Greek. The art was Greek. Everything. But then the Russian people started, and on that we build what we know today as Russian customs. Russian Orthodox customs. Orthodoxy is the same, but you have Greek customs, you have Serbian customs. And that is very important because, and this is where Rome is wrong. Rome completely does not accept any national identity or input. Whereas the Orthodox Church says, no, let the people express themselves. But in order to express themselves, they have to do what? They have to accept it, and it has to become their own. Anya?
Well, I was gonna say that, why do our songs, like,
Okay,
Christian-
that's our follow-up. Let me then finish this.
Okay.
Okay, remember your question.
Right.
So, it took almost 200 years and so finally, but what happened at that moment? When the Russian people finally accepted Orthodoxy as their own, and it was the basis on which we started to build our
Tradition?
Russian,
Orthodox?
Heritage?
yes, our traditions, okay. What happened at that moment historically?
The reforms? Reform?
The reforms or consequences that?
So like, when we added, like,
Tatar.
What?
The Mongol.
Tatari. The Mongols came, and we found ourselves what?
Fighting?
Not hiding, but isolated. It's very important in Orthodoxy to have what?
communication.
What?
Communication.
Yes, to have, interaction. This is why you should remember that you belong to the Russian Orthodox Church, but is it helpful sometimes to visit a Greek church, to go to visit a Serbian church? Yes, to see how other Orthodox nations live. It could be very productive. We were cut off at that particular moment. So what happened? In our development, there was nothing heretical, but our development was exclusively what?
Internal.
Yes. And we could not, what to do, how should I express? We could not check ourselves in comparison to other Orthodox people. And that maybe would not be so bad. But what happened is, we were living in such isolation that we began to fear anything that was not our own. The question here is Nikon. By the 17th century, people, передовые люди, how would I say that in English? What?
Peter the Great?
No, передовые.
Oh.
Leading.
Progressive, maybe would be more progressive people saw that Russia would leave its isolation. And two very interesting people appear in Russian history at this moment. They're 20 years apart. You mentioned
Peter the Great?
Peter the Great, and whoever wrote this question mentions Nikon. They were people far ahead of their time. They knew and they saw that Russia must leave its isolation. But what's the difference between them?
Well, one's religious, the other's secular.
No, Peter was very religious. Peter was samouchka, self-taught, but he was not, and Peter loved Russia. Patriarch Nikon had no formal education either. But what was the difference between the two of them?
One's church reforms, the other is like the whole country's reforms.
Where they turned for help.
Where they turned for help.
Oh.
Nikon said, we are Orthodox. Let's turn our vision towards our roots. And our roots were what?
Other Orthodox?
What?
Other Orthodox?
Yes,
Greek?
but precisely
Greek?
the Byzantium.
Oh.
Okay, Greeks. We'll use the word Greeks. Peter wanted to turn our eyes where?
West.
West. Both of them wanted the best for Russia, but one said, okay, it The West has all this to offer us. And Nikon said, no. The East, Orthodox roots. The problem is Nikon wasn't allowed to carry, he was stopped. He wasn't allowed to carry on his reforms. The reforms were done, later, and by people who did not have his vision. But this is where those people that, grew up in this isolation would say, no, только не греков, the старобрядцы, the old ritualists, or the old believers as is translated into English, which is not the correct translation. It's translated as starověry, but that is not, the Viera was the same. So what I'm saying, the core of Nikon's reform was what? We should not, what? Was Nikon against our practices? No, as long as we understood that that is just our practice. When people would say, everyone else is wrong, we are right, Nikon was fighting our mentality of
Isolation.
I don't know, did I answer your question, whoever wrote the question? The Nikon, and Peter too, except in opposite directions. Okay, I don't know, did I answer your question? That it's not the question of the actual rituals. The question is our attitude towards the rituals. Because, let me just finish. Nikon had a deacon who served with him.
Sounds like the beginning of a limerick. Actually.
What?
No, right.
Deacon had the cameras, yes.
Deacon whose name was Phil.
No, he had a deacon and he said, Vladika, I lived with these traditions all my life. Let me die with them. I accept what you're trying to say, but I grew up with these traditions. And Nikon said, go ahead. So Nikon understood the difference. What Nikon was fighting was our mentality. And this is what I see in Russia now. After the liberation of communism, a lot of the Russians dove into, Zapad this, Zapad that, Western this, Western that. Is everything from the West?
No.
No. It's not always profitable for us or good for us. But we have to be able to distinguish what is good and what is bad, and also различать the approach.
Differentiate.
Пожалуйста.
I was gonna say that when you were talking about our music, how Greeks started our music. Well, we have special types of not songs, but like hymns that we sing. Yeah. Well, Christians, like regular Christians, like on the 25th. On the 25th, well, hold on. Well,
Talk a little louder.
okay, on the 25th of December, my mom was watching this thing at night. It was how Christians, like, they were singing and all that at their own church, and they have similar songs like us. Like, why do they have similar songs like us?
You mean like Christmas carols, or
No, like hymns.
hymns that are sung in the Western church? Why are the hymns sung in the Western church similar to ours?
Could have been the same root. Some of our songs, the famous Irmasi of Christmas, Christos рождается, славите, what's it in English?
Christ is born, give you glory.
They're taken from a sermon of St. Gregory the theologian. Well, the same sermon exists in the West. I mean, translation.
And for 1,000 years, the churches were together. So.
But what I wanted, I didn't finish myself. Some people in Russia now are jumping at everything from the West. The reaction to some people is that, нет, ничего, cut all the throats of all the... No, but there is that, there's these, what do you call them,
Radicals?
Radicals, no, but you call them here, what do you call them here?
Extremists?
No,
You mean the skinheads? The skinheads.
Rednecks.
I did the question about the best.
Hillbillies?
I didn't forget it. So, I mean, but you have to be able to, show discernment and, but also the reaction is, and this is, whereas Nikon's reaction was, wait a second, you just can't, everything, Greek is, label it all, now, the vestments developed over time. The essential, meaning of the vestments were there, but they developed, our bishop's sakas, you saw that long, like,
Outer room?
yes, bishops wore a philonion, like the priests wear originally, but then in Constantinople they started wearing the imperial dalmatic, and then that developed into, and in Russia it so happened that that transition from Greece came exactly at the time of Nikon, so people associate, say for instance, the vestments I wear with Nikon's reforms, whereas the Philonian is pre-Niconian. That's just a coincidence. It has nothing to do with the reforms themselves. Did we keep the faith? Yes, we kept the faith, and actually, I hate to be so blunt, because some of you might have relatives who belong to the old believers, but in order to preserve tradition, the old believers in some cases lost the church, because they, in order to preserve tradition, they rejected the priests who accepted the reforms, and themselves deprived of, were left without priests. So the faith is there. Unfortunately, it was the old believers who, they kept the traditions, but sometimes lost the faith. It's already almost 10. I see people are getting tired of doing this. It's up to Father's you.
Maybe just another question.
We want them to be very tired, so when they go back to the cabins, they will want to go to sleep immediately.
Oh, we want to snowball fight. Yeah, we want to have a snowball fight.
When did high backs come into use?
The what?
High backs.
The Philonians with the.
That's when drafts appeared in church.
It's getting cold in here.
I think actually, I mean, if we can, sorry, I got myself sledding a little bit today. Two things. One is, was this nice to have a conversation with Luca?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good.
Excellent.
And I don't know if you appreciated today, but Bishop Peter, both the previous Sunday and then for the Feast of St. Nicholas, didn't serve in Chicago because his back was hurting him so badly. And you notice maybe a couple times he sat down, he'll never tell you this is why I'm saying this. He'll never say this, but he sat down because he was in pain today. So you're very special. For over 10 days, for 2 weeks, the bishop has not been serving. But he came here, sat on the plane, I'm sure uncomfortable seat, made it to be here, to be with you, and served today. He could very easily have said, Fathers, I don't feel well, I'll just be in the altar. But no, he wanted to serve. So we need to all thank Vladika for his presence and his care. I don't know, those of you from Russia may be able to help us appreciate. Would a Russian bishop spend 3 days with 20 kids?
No.
Do you know of situations like this in Russia? No, wouldn't happen. So we're very grateful to Bishop Peter. When we're finished tonight, I'd like everybody to come and get a blessing. I know, Father Gregory, you're leaving. What
5
time?
o'clock in the morning tomorrow.
I can't do that.
5?
So Father Gregory's van is leaving at 5. Mine is going to be coming over here for breakfast. We'll have to look at the calendar. I'll talk to Father about the exact time. We're not going to leave at 5, but we will be leaving in the morning. And so those of you who are leaving at 5, I suspect you won't see Vladika again.
Well, they're leaving right from the cabins.
Well, all the more reason for everyone to come and get a blessing from Vladika. And please remember that we pray for our bishops, that God help them. And that's in all spheres of life, that they be physically healthy, that they be spiritually healthy, and that mentally sharp and help us. And I hope that the conversation you had this evening with Ulrika is helpful to you.
I just want to say that the question of, rituals and traditions, and I think it's a very actual, a very up-to-date, because I think that what happened in the first few centuries after Russian conversion, a similar, maybe in a smaller scale, but something similar is happening in Russia today. So I think it's a very, what would we say, актуальная тема.
It's a very real topic.
Can I say that some of you didn't get your questions answered, and it's not because we don't like you personally, but we just couldn't get to every question. So feel free to ask your question to your priest when you get home, or tonight when we get back to the cabins. Apparently there's a snowball fight scheduled, but after that, and all the wounded have been helped. You could also ask the priest your questions there.
Yes, very good, but we don't have time.
And one more thing.
There's a very good
Maxime,
question.
are you ready?
No.
No? Okay. Maxime has been putting together a kind of a collage, a video of different photos. So if you had some photos that you've taken, we need to get them to Maxime. And one other thing I would like to do is we need to get some paper with everybody's email so that we can keep everybody in touch with each other. So can you, Peter, start writing?
We should also say, while we have everyone together, that this we were partially sponsored, and your trips here were partially sponsored by the Fund for Assistance of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and they have asked us to have some of you, at least one of you, volunteer to do a little work for them, perhaps write up an article about the conference, share some photographs, so on and so forth. Those who would be interested in doing that should talk to Father Daniel, because he's the head of our youth department, and he'll be very happy to organize that. So please make sure to do that, because we want to say thank you to those who helped us. Also, our own Diocesan St. John Kucherov Society supported us as well, but there are no requirements for the St. John Kucherov Society.
Well, and just to consider, each one of you was asked for a registration fee of $100. And if you think about all that's taken place, the food, the transportation, the lodging, $100 doesn't begin to cover the cost. We brought Father Gleb over, and that was significant expense in terms of transportation. So, this is just one little thing, and there's many people who made an effort to come and be here, and so I hope you appreciate that sometimes, I recall when I was your age, you think, nobody cares about me, nobody's interested in me, nobody worries about my life, and nobody takes an interest. But I hope you realize that the reason that Father Gregory, Father Nikenti, Bishop Peter, Nina, Nikolai, that all these people came is because of a desire to help each and every one of you in some fashion. And so, please try to appreciate that as you can.
Just follow up quickly on what I was saying about paganism and the 3 stages of paganism. Where was paganism developed to its highest form?
Greece?
Greco-Roman world, and this is where Christianity, of course, Christianity is much more above all that, but this is where Christianity came in, into direct conflict, and the pagans reacted to, instead of trying to answer the Christians, they reacted by what?
Trying to destroy them.
What? By persecution.
And coming back to my topic of thanks, the other person we need to thank is Father Nikenti, because Father Nikenti is rector of this parish and of this monastery, and
This brotherhood.
This brotherhood?
Yes.
Yes, I should say this brotherhood. And none of the things that have happened without somebody thinking about it, trying to make a plan, and then finding people to execute it.
And he'll be cleaning for 3 days after we leave.
I suspect that's true. But please remember that there's a very good university in this town. Those of you who are considering going to college,
Engineering
It's
especially.
it's particularly an engineering school, but they have more other nursing, they have other
Finlandia is a
specialties.
very good nursing school.
And so, you know, when you consider going to school, consider it a place that's got Orthodox church near it so that you could attend. And this is a good one. If you live in the state of Michigan, it's part of the University of Michigan system. So, Anna?
Whoever writes that letter, do you have to write about everything that happened, or just what in general, like for church and?
Or what impressed you the most?
I think it would be more personal, your impression. You know, essentially, Fund for Assistance, for those of you who don't know, is an organization that spans all of the dioceses of the Russian Church abroad and tries to provide funds to help out for all sorts of things. Priests who need assistance, parishes who need help, individuals who need help in events like this. And so I think their request is for a little bit of reaction, like thank you because they contributed a significant amount of money to make this happen.
So we're saying thank you to them, pretty much?
Right, so I would like, you know, it would be a thank you letter.
Telling them why it was worth
I would like to say thank you to Fund for Assistance for its support, because when I came to the St. Herman's conference, this is what happened, right? You know, this is what I enjoyed, this is what I got out of the St. Herman's conference, because, and they're, of course, part of their goal is simply to understand that it was useful for themselves, but also, let's be honest, they are going to try and support, they gave us some money last year, we'll ask for their support in the future, and so they would like to be able to go to people who donate and say, look at what we did, we sponsored this youth conference and these kids came up here and they have this experience, and look at what they said about the conference. That's what they're looking for. Father?
While we are at the words of thanking next to the Vladika for coming up here, I would like to thank all of you that actually come, because you made a big difference here. The services yesterday night, the services this morning, they were beautiful. The church was half full, and not something that we see here very often. Here are only a few people. You made a huge difference, and you made a huge impression. I asked my people around here, so because they were working a lot, but then they said, so was it just work? And I said, no, we love it. We loved all of the young people who were here. You made a huge impression, because you're the future of the church. And so thank you for coming up here. You made a big difference. On that note, I have only one request left. You were actually homed in, I think, beautiful cabins. The only requirement on these cabins is that they are being left in a somewhat clean state. If you use any kind of dishes in these cabins, they have to be washed. So they have to be cleaned and put away. And that's pretty much actually the only requirement that we have.
Are there instructions for sheets and towels? Are they
No.
put in a pile? Are they all to be in the
There's
bathroom?
no instructions.
The beds don't need to be stripped?
I would do that.
Well,
I would do that.
I would too, but I just want to make sure.
There's no instruction for it, but if you would do that, then of course that would help the people there.
I don't think we would have time if we have to wake up at
Well, you can just get up at 3,
But
Lydia.
there's-
I was gonna say,
Okay.
It'll take 2 seconds to pull the sheets off and put them in a pile, so that in each room you have a pile of sheets, and try and put the pillow back where it was, and fold your blanket.
You take the sheets into the
It's a-
pillowcases.
It's a basic thing.
But the dishes is an absolutely mandatory thing. You have to clean the dishes, because otherwise people will get
Has everyone,
We're not done yet. Please have a seat.
do we have everyone's emails? Anyone not have their email on here?
Those questions we were not able to answer, well, Pete had a very good one, I'll take it, I'll answer it in Ann Arbor, but as Father said, all the questions were good, but we're limited by time, sorry.
So, have safe travel zone for the people that I don't see tomorrow morning.